Good morning. Woo! So glad to see you. You make my heart just go crazy. Wow, it's so great to be here together. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Delaware County. No matter who you are, no matter where you came from, no matter who you love, you are welcome here this morning. Please rise in body or spirit to sing our opening hymn, number 347, Gather the Spirit. And please remain standing for the lighting of the chalice and the recitation of the covenant. Gather the Spirit, harvest the power. Our separate fires will kindle one flame. This hour, our chosen building is all the same. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy. Gather in peace, gather in hands, gather in sympathy now and then, gather in hope, compassion and strength, gather to celebrate once again. Going in all, drawn by the moon and fed by the sun. Gathering as one, gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then, gather in hope, compassion and strength, gather to celebrate once again. I invite Lisa Grieco and Stephen Grieco to come forward to light the chalice. The chalice lighting words this morning are from the Reverend Bruce Southworth, Minister Emeritus of the Community Church of New York, Unitarian Universalist. For the gift of this day and for our community of spiritual nurture and compassion, we give thanks. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. May our many sparks meet and merge in communion of heart and soul. Please join me now as we recite our covenant, which is on the screen. Enriched by our differences and joined together in our search for meaning, we covenant with ourselves and each other to seek truth in a spirit of love, justice, and to serve others with a joyful heart. Now is your opportunity to take a few moments to greet one another. We'll have ample time after the service. Good morning. Good morning. I am Ruth Hendry. My pronouns are she and her, and I will serve as your worship associate this morning. We extend an especial welcome to you if this is your first time attending our service. I want to welcome our friends who are viewing on Zoom. Please remember you can activate closed captioning if that is helpful for you. And if you'd like to talk with others after the service, there will be a brief virtual coffee hour, so just stay logged in to speak to others. If you are attending worship in person, please join us for refreshments outside right in front of the sanctuary. It is a great privilege for me to welcome the Reverend Ed Brock, our new interim minister, to the pulpit for the first time. I invite you to attend the town hall meeting immediately following the service after a brief chance for sustenance, both in person and on Zoom, for the opportunity to share your vision for the future of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Delaware County with Reverend Ed. As we settle into our time of worship together, please remain seated as we sing hymn number 16, "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple." Each Sunday, we gather in community, carrying the emotions and experiences of the week. We may be full of joy or sorrow. We honor those feelings by dropping stones into this bowl of water. Just as the stones are held by the water, so are all who drop them held in love by this community. All are invited to join. You may come up this aisle, drop your stone, and then go back, return to your seat via the center aisle. Those online may enter their joys or sorrows in the chat. All are welcome. And I drop a final stone for the joys and sorrows held by those online and those who were unable to be with us today. Please remain seated as we sing Spirit of Life.
Good morning. If I had known this many people were going to show up, I would have worn a suit and tie. So I apologize for that informality. I'd like to share with you a reading from Jennifer Von Roo and Lynette Lowe. It's entitled Being Sanctuary, and every time we come into this space, we are engaged in a lifelong process of being a sanctuary, of creating a sanctuary for ourselves and for one another. And they write this: welcome to this space, this sanctuary of peace where we come not only to create our best selves, but also to do the work of creating a beloved community. We come together today as individuals, much like individual pieces of glass or pottery that are different in shapes and size and colors, all of which are broken with imperfect, jagged edges, but always beautiful. While our pieces may not always fit neatly together, it is within this sanctuary, guided by our principles and beliefs and values, that we gather together to create a beautiful mosaic. May the brokenness and beauty you find in one another create peace in this space and fill our hearts with love as together we create worship. Amen.
The work of our congregation takes many forms within our congregation and throughout our community and the world. It is with your generous financial support that the transformative power of love takes shape in our everyday living. We gladly receive your generous donations through the text to give function on your smartphone. You can text your donation to the number provided on the screen. Also, there are boxes in the back of the sanctuary where folks can leave checks and cash. Thank you for your generosity.
Let me begin by saying it's dangerous that you have no clocks that I can see, because I could get carried away with one of my 90-minute sermons and not know the context. I'd like to begin by saying I would like to thank you for the privilege you have extended to me to be your interim minister, to walk with you on this path for a period of time, and it is an important path as you orient yourself to the future. You are a congregation with great promise. You are a healthy congregation. Your future is extraordinarily bright. I look forward to working with you and helping you create the best version of yourself as you move into your future. I'd like to celebrate the miracle that you are. It is a miracle that in our culture, such as it is, people like you are able to come together and to forge a community of faith that provides an alternative to many, that gives hope, that stands for something that's real and important, and that represents justice in this world. I celebrate the miracle that you are. Also, before I go further, I am working with a new sound system, and if you don't hear me, could you just raise your hand? And for those who raise their hand, I will meet you after church and I'll go over the whole sermon again. But I wanted to say to everybody here, and I hope you will hear me, that whoever you are, your presence here is important. If you have been here 40 years, your presence is important. If you just walked through the doors this morning for the first time, you are important to the vitality, the hope, and the future of this congregation. Everybody here needs, and I sound like I have an amen corner, and I'm so thankful for that. Everybody here has a contribution to make and to give that is important. Let me share some things about why I am here and what I do. We are involved in a process where the end result is getting a settled minister for this congregation. That is a very important process, because when you get the settled minister, that person, or if it's a couple, that pair, will affect the life of your congregation for 15 or 20 years. So it is important that you make that decision in a situation where you're in the best shape you can possibly be, your best self, and you are designing a system and a process of finding a minister that is sure to get the best person for you, that matches who you are and what you are about. Another related goal to this is to set up the conditions for having the most successful long-term ministry you can possibly have, because a minister you bring is not going to be able to create a miracle for you. They will have to work with the reality of who you are, and it is very important that your structure, your organization is in the very best shape for them. Creating an organizational structure that serves you, that fits you, that maximizes the effectiveness of your congregation is important. But one of the key things that I find to be extremely important is to create a structure that unleashes the energy of people in this congregation to do good to those in this community and beyond. To create a structure that unleashes the genius, the energy, the enthusiasm, the talent, which is abundant in this congregation, to serve the purpose of doing good. Because what happens in this congregation affects people. It affects their lives. It affects what happens to you. It affects what happens in the larger community. So it's very important. Well, what do I mean by organizational structure? I mean things like the bylaws, the governance structure, the way you do what you do. It means defining roles and responsibilities and boundaries, lines of accountability, so that you can be clear with one another about who has the right to make what decision about what subjects. It means having a congregation that honors covenant, that honors how you choose to be with one another. It means defining your congregation in terms of what you are for rather than what you are against. There's a lot of detail in what I just described. But the key thing running through all of this is, what can we do organizationally to unleash the energies of each of you to serve one another and to serve the community in ways that impact people in good and in powerful ways. And what we do matters. Now let me share with you some experiences I've had. I've worked with at least 8 congregations, and let me share with you something about our wonderful congregations. People come to a UU congregation and are quite often somewhat opinionated. They have struggled to define themselves as individuals in a culture which wants to snuff that out, right? And that means theologically, politically, and in other ways. And so people come to a congregation like this filled with the energy of being an individual, of doing my own thing, of thinking freely, of not being hindered by anyone else's idea of what's politically or theologically or religiously correct. And then they come into a group like this that is dependent for its health on people working together in a unified way and not being so individualistic, not thinking in terms of the I, but thinking in terms of the we. And it's only by doing that that the congregation is actually able to make an impact. Now, consider this, one of the manifestations of the difficulty. There are about 185,000 Unitarian Universalists in America. Now, it depends on whether the minister is estimating the membership or the board treasurer is estimating the membership, in terms of figuring out what the real number is, right? But let's say, just for the sake of argument, around 185,000. We are a nation of 334 million people. There's a difference there. There's quite a divergence. I calculate, and this is in a whole nother sermon, based on various surveys of what people actually think and believe in America, I believe that approximately 2% of the American population has viewpoints that are compatible with Unitarian Universalist beliefs. At least, that's conservative, okay? Well, that's 6,700,000 people in America that are sympathetic, and I believe that is an underestimate. That are sympathetic with our beliefs and views. I believe that potential UUs are 10% of this figure, which is to say 670,000 people. So what I'm saying is that I think it is logical and fact-based to think and believe that there are potentially 670,000 Unitarian Universalists that should be in our congregations that are not, because we are stuck in 185,000. Now, I have worked, as I said, with about 8 congregations as an interim and at least 2 as a settled minister. And I believe the reason for this stuckness, because I've seen it with my own eyes, is that people cannot make the jump between their very vigorous individualism and their very vigorous desire to be independent, and the need as an institution to come together and think of ways we can collectively organize ourselves so that we can tap into the great energy of people that we have in our congregation and beyond. So what I see is that the wonderful energy of Unitarian Universalist congregations, and I think I've had the experience of talking with and getting to know some of the most wonderful people in the world by working with UU congregations, that great energy, that great moral sensitivity and awareness is dissipated in an inability to organize ourselves in such a way that we can really make a difference. And one of the great ironies that I have experienced is that UU see themselves as extraordinarily liberal and progressive, but when it comes to organizational structure, we are some of the most conservative religious people on earth. Because we live in a society where fundamentalist churches, they may be very, very rigid in their belief structure, but they're absolutely wild in terms of their organizational structure. They'll try and do anything to serve the needs of people. And that's what we're here for. We're here to serve the needs of people, the people here, the people in our community who need us and who would benefit by our presence, and the people in the larger community who would benefit from our voice if it were strong enough to hear. Well, I've just touched on something that I will speak about again and again. That's why you must keep coming to my sermons, is that I just give little pieces of what I'm going to talk about. But I would like to introduce myself so you know who you're dealing with, for right or wrong, for better or for worse. And first, a little background history. My mother's father is from Swansea, Wales. My mother's mother is from Copenhagen, Denmark. My father's mother's family lived in the South for several generations, but her family on the maternal side goes back in 5 generations to a Benjamin Davis who was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in July 1719. His lineage was both Welsh and English. My father's paternal side of the family is unknown from the point of my grandmother's father, because my grandmother was born out of wedlock, as they used to say ages ago. And the father of my grandmother is shrouded in mystery and in other dark thoughts. Shrouded in mystery, I have never been able to figure out the lineage, but if you know something about genealogy, talk to me after the service, because I want to find that guy or that lineage. Now, I am not finished with my connections with Pennsylvania. On my father's side of the family, if we go back 6 generations, we reach a George Frederick Brock, whose family roots are in Switzerland, but who immigrated from South Germany, coming to Pennsylvania in 1733 as part of a group called the Palatine Moravians. He was an indentured servant for 5 years because he could not pay for the trip on the ship from London to this state. So we Brocks have paid our dues in Pennsylvania because of his work. Both branches of my immediate family have been in the South for several generations, tragically or fortunately, depending on your perspective, but some have branched out, and I wanted, however, you to know about my Pennsylvania connections. Both sides of my family were drawn to Birmingham because of the opportunities presented by the steelmaking business called U.S. Steel in its latest phase of development. I grew up on the western edge of Birmingham, Alabama. I attended a school system called Fairfield, Alabama, which was slightly to the west of that. My father worked for U.S. Steel for 43 years. My mother was a homemaker and a small business owner. I was the youngest of 4 children. We were part of what used to be called the middle class. Neither of my parents went to college. All their children did. As I grew up, Birmingham was the center of a great civil rights struggle. The things I saw and heard and read about made a profound impression on me and shaped who I am politically and religiously. My father was an avid liberal, believe it or not. My mother was more moderate in her beliefs toward the conservative side. We had a lot of interesting family conversations. My father had his views that were very liberal in the household, but never spoke outside the house because that would have been suicidal in terms of his job. The social turmoil was felt by me personally in the school system I attended, and there are so many stories I could tell, but let it just be said that I saw and experienced a lot of turmoil. These experiences led me to certain convictions as a young person, which I was not able to tolerate, able to interpret in a conceptual way, but I did later. One was the vivid impression that in life there are things that are wrong and there are things that are right. To treat people disrespectfully is wrong. I saw in certain people's actions what I think could be called legitimately evil. I learned, or I came to believe, that there was such thing as good and evil in the world, and I wanted to be on the side of good, and I felt that innately and intuitively without really conceptually working it out. And it was obvious to me. The second thing is that I was left with a permanent interest in how civility and peaceful coexistence and harmonious living with diversity could thrive. How was that achievable? Because as I grew up as a young man, I became aware that Birmingham was really run by, to an extraordinary degree, was run by people who were racist and fascist, and that they wielded power behind the scenes. And then 3 hours to the east was the city of Atlanta. And one of the mottos that the city of Atlanta created was, the city of Atlanta, too busy to hate. And it led to one city flourishing and one city not flourishing. And to this day, Atlanta is an extraordinarily very flourishing city, and Birmingham still struggles. And I trace that back to the legacy of what I experienced as a young man. While in college, I was drawn to the vocation of ministry. I blame that to the maternal side, George Frederick Brock, who was a Moravian and interested in religion. It's got to be genetic. It's not logical to be so. I naturally gravitated towards the United Methodist Church because that's the church I grew up in, and there were really not UUs running around in Birmingham, Alabama being noticed. I graduated from college and I went straight to Vanderbilt University. I went directly from seminary into a United Methodist Church. I was there for 2 years in a UU parish in a suburb of Birmingham, and I realized, hey, I can't do this. I went to some older colleagues and I said, hey, you know, I'm having a struggle with people, these beliefs, I can't really think in this way. And they said, look, Ed, we know that the Bible is symbolical. But they believe, the people in the congregation, they believe it's literally true. Now, we must cater to the fact that they believe it's literally true, while we know it's all symbolical. And I was talking to people who were elderly clergy or elder clergy, and they were really great and wonderful people and progressive people, many of them. But that's what they were telling to me, and I said, I don't want to do that. So I just left, and I went into the business world for several years, and there I learned about and became acquainted with the Unitarian Universalists. And so after a few years there, and I was at the Foothills Unitarian Church and got to know a minister named Royal Jones, Walter Royal Jones III, which is a great name for a minister, and became acquainted with the Unitarian movement. And then I moved into that sphere. I jumped through the hoops, maybe I shouldn't say that. I went through the process of becoming a UU minister. And there followed two settled ministries with the Unitarian Universalist Church, one in Florida and one in the Pacific Northwest. But one of the most important, those were wonderful ministries for me that were very, very fulfilling. And I got to meet wonderful people and experience the joy of serving as a UU minister. But one of the things that was really influential for me was that when I was in Florida, I became aware of a guy named Rabbi Edwin Friedman. And a friend of mine took me to a workshop that he did down in Orlando. And Rabbi Edwin Friedman, nobody, I don't think, remembers his name now, but if you go back into the 90s, he was everywhere. He was the #1 consultant for congregations, whether they be Protestant, Catholic, Jewish. He did consulting with political organizations and Governor Ann Richards of Texas and many other people, but he was someone who had taken the theories about the human condition and human nature that were developed by a guy named Dr. Murray Bowen, who worked at the National Institutes of Mental Health in Washington, D.C., and he converted those ideas or explained those ideas or elaborated those ideas or expanded those ideas towards thinking about congregations, and he was the first person to do that. And I remember going to a workshop that he led in Orlando for the first time and listening to him over a period of a weekend and realizing this is the first guy I've ever heard who really knows what's going on in a congregation. And so that was an eye-opener, and that began a path for me. So I studied with Rabbi Edwin Friedman until his death. I studied with him in Washington, D.C., and I helped sponsored a workshop he did in Florida, and I had many other interactions with him. My two settled ministries were very fulfilling, but Rabbi Friedman really affected my thinking, and I was led to the desire, the wish to do consulting with congregations. And so that is where I moved and the direction I moved, and it converted into an interest in interim ministry, which is where I can practice my my craft. Another very important event in our lives is that in 2002, Alphys and my wife, who you'll get to meet towards the end of this month or the beginning of September, my wife and I went to China to receive our first daughter, Allie, into our lives. And in the summer of 2004, not long after that, I went to China a second time with a family friend to pick up Lily, our second daughter. And these trips to China were extraordinarily life-transforming for me. By the time we had adopted the two children, I was pretty much had my eyes and my heart and my mind set for doing consulting work in the spirit of Rabbi Friedman. And so I did venture into interim work. And before I came here, I have done interim work in normally 2 years in each of the following places: Hamilton, Ontario, Canada; Austin, Texas; Costa Mesa, California; the First Unitarian Church of Oakland; Ventura, California; Birmingham, Alabama; and Huntsville, Alabama; and Winston-Salem, North Carolina. My move from the West Coast to the east to the southeast 8 years ago coincides with a need I'd felt for several years to get closer to my family. All my family is all over the southeast. I could not talk them into coming to the West Coast. I had to come to them. And particularly my brother, my older brother, had a massive heart attack about 10 years ago, and that really turned my head to the need to come back to the southeast. And here I am, kind of close to the southeast, but a little above. I must put at the very tip top of my great events that have happened to me is my marriage to Alphys, my wife. It is my life's greatest treasure. My wife and I, this December the 15th, will celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary. Now, if you're wondering, we got married at age 15, I think. Now, you may say to yourself, gosh, that's awful early to get married. However, where I grew up in Alabama, if you just avoided marrying a cousin, it was considered a coup. Marrying Alphys is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Some people ask me, what is interim ministry? I sometimes hope they'll just stop asking that question. Well, I touched on that a little bit earlier, and I will talk more about it in the town hall after the service. But I want to reiterate a couple of things. You have a very bright future ahead of you. You have very great potential as a group of people, as a force in this community, as a source of healing and helpfulness to the people who are a part of this great community. Your history of 16 years of successful ministry prior to the interim, the smooth transition of retiring ministry is a great blessing. You have an extraordinarily large RE program relative to the size of your congregation. That is a great boon. Now, when I say you're in a smooth transition and you had a smooth parting of your former minister, let me pause for a moment and give a comparison. I once worked with a congregation, I won't say where, but one of the board members, as part of the transition process, right before I arrived, as part of the transition process, of deliberating and making sure the former minister was going to leave and a new interim minister was going to come in. For that process, one of the board members had hired not one, but 2 private detectives who came to the meeting armed. So the stress level there was pretty intense, right? So believe me, you're walking in clover. Everything is wonderful. And having met the people I have met thus far, I can say without hesitation or ambiguity that you have the talent and ability here to do anything, and I mean anything, you put your heart and mind to. But I wish to emphasize something. I cannot do anything without your help. I have a lot of great experience. I could easily brag on myself for 5 or 6 minutes. I'll refrain from that. But I have expertise and experience to bring here, but it doesn't mean anything unless you help me. Because what I think and do and say is really not very meaningful. If you and I can join hands and link arms and walk together, then we can really get something done. So let us join hands. Let us join together to develop the foundation of a future that can see the progressive cause of growth and strength of our values in this region. I look forward to our time of working together. I am thrilled that I am here, and I look forward to our adventure together.
Thank you, Reverend Ed. We're ready. Now, please rise and body your spirit as we sing our closing hymn, number 126, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Do you have closing words? Because
I don't.
But it's fine.
Yeah. Every blessing. I'll extinguish as you do the words. Standing as we recite our benediction and extinguish the chalice. But first I want to thank Reverend Ed and say how grateful we are that you're here. I also want to thank our AV team, Don Sloat, Carl Thompson, Marilyn Huff, and our hospitality team members, Marva Williams, Jane Seelos, Michelle, and Mark Yerger. And of course, Joy for the support of our worship experience.
Also, the beautiful flowers this morning were donated by Jing Wang and Vidpat Nair to celebrate Reverend Ed beginning his interim ministry at UUCDC, and they're from their garden. Ooh. And now for our benediction. For those who come seeking God, may God go with you. For those who come embracing life, may life return your affection. And for those who come to seek a path, may it be found, and the courage to take it, step by step, blessed be. This concludes our service this morning.